There are corners of the American South where the air never seems to move, where the rivers run slow and brown, and the sound of the cicadas blends with something else, something that almost sounds like whispering that in those places, people say time doesn't pass, that it just lingers, like a shadow that refuses to leave. One of those places lies 30 miles west of Opelousas, Louisiana. A ruin now swallowed by marshland and Spanish moss. The locals call it Briarwood, though its real name was long ago struck from parish records. Once a grand sugar plantation, it now stands as a skeleton of its former self, its chimneys cracked and leaning, its roof long since caved in. But on humid nights, when the mist hangs thick over the bayou, some swear they see a lantern light weaving between the trees, a pale figure walking the same path again and again, as though retracing his sins. They say it's Charles Beauregard, the master of Briarwood, and the man who could not die, the man behind the mansion. Charles Beauregard was born in 1819 to a family of sugar merchants. His father, Etienne Beauregard, came from New Orleans with ambition and cruelty in equal measure, buying up acres of swampy land and turning it into profit by sheer will and human misery. By the time Charles was 16, he had already learned his father's trade, how to measure a man's worth not in dignity, but in dollars. But those who knew Charles in his youth said he was different, quieter. A dreamer, obsessed with the idea of immortality and legacy. That he spoke often of the soul, not out of faith, but out of defiance. That he told his tutors once, if God holds the key to eternity, then I'll learn how to forge my own. When Etienne died suddenly in 1847, Charles inherited everything, the plantation, the workers, the debts, and the ghosts. That he renamed it Briarwood, saying it sounded less French, more eternal. To outsiders, he was just another Southern gentleman, refined, well-read and devoted to his young wife, Eleanor Whitmore Beauregard. But those who worked his land whispered that something in him was restless. That he would walk the fields alone at night, murmuring to himself, sometimes stopping to press his ear to the soil as though listening for something below. The fever and the foul. In the summer of 1853, the yellow fever epidemic reached St. Landry Parish. It swept through the bayou like wildfire, killing hundreds in a matter of weeks. Charles did what any wealthy man of the time might do. He sent for doctors from New Orleans, bought imported tonics and mercury pills, and prayed, not to God, but to whatever power might listen. Still, the fever claimed Eleanor. Witnesses said he never wept at her funeral. He simply stood there, pale as marble, and when the final clod of dirt fell upon her coffin, he turned and walked away without a word. From that day forward, he became a stranger to the living. He stopped attending mass, stopped writing letters, stopped paying his field hands in coin, instead rewarding them with whiskey or promises. And at night, strange carriages began to arrive at Briarwood's gates. Men cloaked in black stepped out, carrying chests of books and vials of dark liquid. They were seen entering the house, but rarely leaving. Whispers of the occult. By 1855, Briarwood had become a place of superstition. Travelers along the bayou would hear screams carried over the water and see candles burning in the attic windows long after midnight. Charles was rumored to have built a secret chamber beneath the parlor, a vault where he conducted seances and experimented with ancient rites drawn from Le Livre des Esprits, a French manuscript banned by the church decades earlier. He dismissed most of his servants, keeping only a mute Creole boy named Jean and an aging midwife known locally as Mère Claudine, who was said to practice root work and folk magic. Neighbors avoided the plantation entirely, but a few spoke of seeing Eleanor's figure in the garden, a woman in a white dress, standing motionless among the dying roses. They claimed her eyes were open, but empty. The night of the storm. Then came the night of June 12, 1858. The Gulf sent a storm barreling north, a tempest so fierce it tore trees from their roots. But inside Briarwood, Charles was said to be calm, methodical. According to local legend, that night he attempted his final ritual. He sealed himself inside the upstairs parlor, the same room where Eleanor's portrait hung, and drew a circle upon the floor in a mixture of salt, ash, and his own blood. Mère Claudine later confessed, before her death, that he had paid her to fetch something for him that week, a lock of hair from his wife's grave. She delivered it, trembling, and told him that the dead should not be disturbed. Charles only smiled and replied, "The dead are only sleeping. I intend to wake her." For 3 days, thunder rolled over the bayou. No one entered or left the house. When the storm broke on the morning of June 15, the plantation lay silent. The overseer, a man named Thomas Avery, forced his way inside after receiving no response for 2 days. What he found would haunt him until his own dying breath. The parlor was destroyed, windows shattered, furniture scorched, and the walls smeared with something dark and foul-smelling. At the room's center lay a circle drawn in salt and dried blood, and at its heart, a single gold ring, Eleanor's wedding band, but of Charles Beauregard. There was no sign, not a footprint, not a drop of blood, not a body, only the faint scent of sulfur in the air. The legend begins after that night, Briarwood was abandoned, the parish listed it as condemned property, and within a decade, nature reclaimed it, the sugar mill collapsed into the swamp, and the house itself began to sink into the mud, but locals swore that Charles never left. Children dared each other to walk past the front gates at night, and those who did claimed to hear faint music, a piano playing a melody no one could name. In 1892, two surveyors exploring the ruins made a discovery that reignited the legend. Beneath a warped floorboard in the old parlor, they found a human hand, perfectly preserved. It was clutching a gold ring engraved with the initials CB. Scientists later dismissed it as coincidence, but the locals knew better. They said Charles had finally found his eternity, but it wasn't heaven that answered him. Even now, the people of St. Landry Parish avoid the Briarwood Marsh. They say if you wander there after midnight, you might see a figure standing among the cypress trees, his face hidden by shadow, his lantern flickering with cold blue fire, and if you hear him whisper your name, you must not answer, because those who do, are never heard from again. Some stories are buried by time, others seem to claw their way back. For decades after Charles Beauregard's disappearance, Briarwood was left untouched. The land was considered cursed, the kind of place where crops wouldn't grow and animals refused to cross. Locals called it La Terra Morte, the dead land. They said that even in the height of summer, the air around it stayed cold, but in 1883, 25 years after the storm that ended Briarwood, a new name appeared on the deed, the Holloway Company, a northern investment firm buying up abandoned plantations across Louisiana. They intended to rebuild the sugar mill, restore the mansion, and bring industry back to the region. They did not believe in ghosts. At least not yet. The return to Briarwood. The company sent 3 men to survey the property. William Carter, a civil engineer from Boston, Elias Grant, a land appraiser, and a local foreman, Robert Lang, hired to oversee labor. The trio arrived in late September, when the marshland was low and the air smelled of rot. From the moment they set foot beyond the iron gates, things felt wrong. The road leading to the main house was half sunk under stagnant water, and the oak trees leaned inward as if trying to hide what lay ahead. Lang, who had grown up in the parish, refused to stay the night. He told the others he'd return at sunrise with more men and proper tools, but Carter and Grant, educated, skeptical men, laughed it off. They set up camp inside what remained of the mansion's front hall. By lamplight, they sketched floor plans and measured walls that seemed to shift by the hour. The house creaked and groaned like something alive. Carter noted in his journal that the air inside was colder than outside, and that his compass needle spun uselessly when near the parlor. He wrote, "It is as though the house has a pulse of its own. The walls breathe." The first night. That night, the wind carried strange sounds through the corridors, not quite music, not quite voices. Elias Grant thought he heard someone walking above them, but when they searched the upper floor, they found nothing except a trail of wet footprints leading toward the old parlor. There, on the rotted wooden floor, they saw what looked like a handprint burned into the wood, 5 perfect black marks seared deep into the grain, as if left by something that had been on fire. Grant wanted to leave immediately. Carter refused. He said the locals had poisoned their minds with superstition. "This is just a house," he told him, "old wood, old stories. Nothing more." But when morning came, they found Carter's journal open beside the fire, and a new line written in ink neither of them recognized. "He is still here." Carter swore he hadn't written it. Grant packed his things before breakfast. The vanishing of Elias Grant. Elias never made it out of the swamp. The foreman, Robert Lang, found his horse 2 miles from the gate. Reins snapped clean in 2. The saddlebag was missing, along with Elias's compass and field notes. For days, they searched the marshes. They found no sign of him, no footprints, no torn clothing, nothing. But on the 3rd night, Lang said he saw something from his campfire, a flicker of light moving between the trees, like a lantern swaying in the wind. When he called out, it stopped. Then, slowly, it began to move toward him. He said the light grew brighter as it approached, until he could make out the figure holding it, a tall man in a tattered coat, his face hidden beneath the brim of an old hat. Lang ran. He didn't stop until he reached the main road. The next morning, he resigned his position and refused to speak of Briarwood again. the company closed the site within a month. N01. Wanted to go back, the Journal of William Carter. Only one record from that expedition survived, William Carter's leather-bound field journal, recovered years later by his widow. It's kept today in the archives of the Louisiana Historical Society. The last entries are shaky, erratic, almost desperate. He writes of hearing footsteps at all hours, of finding his tools rearranged overnight, of dreams filled with voices whispering the name Eleanor. On the final page, dated October 3, 1883, he wrote, "The house watches me. The air hums with her name, there is something beneath the floor, I can hear it moving. That I saw him tonight. He carries her ring, God forgive me, but I think he wants me to finish what he began." Carter was found 2 days later, drowned in the flooded cellar. The coroner ruled it an accident, but the water level in the cellar was less than 2 feet deep. Years of silence. After 1883, Briarwood was sealed off by parish order. Locals nailed the gates shut and erected a wooden cross at the entrance. For 40 years, no one dared to enter. The swamp swallowed more of the house each year, until only the upper floor and the remnants of the porch were visible through the vines, but the story didn't die. Hunters claimed to hear hammering sounds from deep within the marsh, as if someone were rebuilding the old house piece by piece. Fishermen saw the reflection of candlelight in the bayou, and in 1906, a traveling preacher reported seeing a man standing on the balcony at sunrise, his figure perfectly still, his face pale as bone. When the preacher called out to him, the man raised his hand, and vanished. The letter from 1921 inches 1921, a letter was sent to the St. Landry Parish Sheriff's Office. It came from a woman named Sarah Lang, the granddaughter of Robert Lang, the foreman who had fled Briarwood in 1883. In her letter, she claimed her grandfather had been visited in his dreams every night for 40 years by the same figure, a man in a dark coat, holding a lantern that burned with blue flame. She said her grandfather died whispering a single phrase, "The master wants it finished." When deputies followed up, they found the Lang family's home abandoned. Every mirror in the house had been covered with cloth. On the dining table, burned into the wood, was the same symbol once seen in the Briarwood parlor, a circle drawn in salt and ash. The letter's final line read, "If anyone finds this, don't go looking for Briarwood. It will find you first." Even now, locals say that Briarwood's ghost hasn't rested. They say Charles Beauregard walks the swamp with his lantern, searching for the one who will finish his ritual. Those who see the light say it flickers 3 times before it fades, as if beckoning, and if you follow it, you'll never come back the same. They say a curse never dies. It only changes hands. By 1921, the legend of Briarwood Plantation had faded into whispers, a story told in hushed tones at small-town bars, or by old men who swore they'd seen lantern light moving through the bayou. But for one man, the story wasn't folklore. It was blood. The Lang family's secret. Thomas Lang, grandson of Robert Lang, was a history teacher in Lafayette, Louisiana. He didn't believe in ghosts, nor did he ever speak of his family's connection to the lost plantation. That changed when his mother, Sarah Lang, the same woman who had written the sheriff's letter, died in 1921. Among her belongings was a small wooden box, sealed shut with red wax and marked with a faint, circular burn, the same shape that once appeared on Briarwood's floorboards. Inside, Thomas found his grandfather's old Bible, but it wasn't like any Bible he had ever seen. The margins were filled with frantic handwriting, notes written in ink and something darker, almost like dried blood. Passages of scripture were underlined and rewritten, some replaced entirely with strange phrases, ash to ash, salt to salt. The offering must be complete. The master walks between worlds. Tucked between the pages was a small parchment, yellowed and brittle with it bore a crude map, the outline of a plantation house surrounded by marsh, and one word written across the top, Crossroads. Thomas felt a chill the first time he saw it. He didn't know what the word meant, but something deep inside him whispered that the curse had not ended. It had only been waiting. The researcher. In 1923, Thomas Lang met Dr. Miriam Caldwell, a historian from Tulane University who specialized in postbellum plantation culture. She had come across Carter's recovered journal in the Louisiana Historical Society's archives and had written a paper on the folklore of Reconstruction-era hauntings. Thomas reached out to her, hoping she could help him trace the origins of the strange markings in his grandfather's Bible. When he showed her the book, she turned pale. "This isn't superstition," she said quietly, "this is ritual language." She explained that in the mid-1800s, certain plantation owners in Louisiana practiced a form of folk necromancy, a twisted blend of Catholic prayer, African voodoo, and Creole mysticism. The circle burned into the wood, she said, was a binding sigil, used to trap a restless spirit between the worlds of the living and the dead. Thomas asked who might have performed such a ritual. Miriam hesitated, then whispered, Charles Beauregard. The unfinished ritual. Through Miriam's research, they uncovered fragments of Beauregard's personal writings, journals, letters, and a ledger found in an estate sale years earlier. In one entry dated 1857, he described the death of his wife, Eleanor, and his desperate attempts to contact her through the old rites of the servants. He had built a hidden chamber beneath the parlor, accessible through a trapdoor in the floor. There, he performed ceremonies with blood and salt, invoking powers he did not understand. The final entry, written days before the hurricane that destroyed Briarwood, read, The offering is not complete, she lingers still, the crossroads must open. Miriam believed the crossroads referred to a literal location, a point in the swamp where four streams converged, forming a natural symbol of balance between worlds. She theorized that Beauregard had attempted to open a passage there, but the storm interrupted him. If the ritual had failed, then his spirit might indeed be trapped, bound to the land, searching for someone to finish what he started. Journey into the swamp. Against her better judgment, Miriam agreed to accompany Thomas to the site. Marked on the old map, they traveled by boat through thick cypress groves, following the slow, muddy current of Bayou de Glazes. The air smelled of decay and wet moss. At dusk, they reached a clearing, the remains of an old plantation road leading to a cluster of stone foundations half swallowed by the swamp. Thomas felt an inexplicable pull toward the ruins. Even though the main house had long since collapsed, the land seemed to breathe. Frogs and crickets fell silent as they approached, and the water shimmered with faint, unnatural light. Miriam took out a lantern and began sketching the foundations, noting the circular indentations in the ground, perfectly spaced, forming a ring nearly 20 feet across. She realized it matched the sigil carved into Lang's Bible. It's not a house, she whispered, it's a ritual site. As night fell, the air thickened with mist. Thomas thought he heard whispers, low and rhythmic, rising and falling with the wind. He turned to Miriam, but her eyes were fixed on something behind him. There, half submerged in the water, stood a stone pedestal. On it lay a rusted silver ring, a woman's wedding band. Eleanor's ring. The awakening. When Thomas touched the ring, the air turned to ice. A gust of wind blew through the clearing, extinguishing the lantern. From somewhere deep in the swamp came the sound of chains dragging through mud. Miriam screamed as the water around the pedestal began to bubble. Then, through the fog, they saw him. A tall figure in a dark coat, face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, holding a lantern that burned with blue flame. Do you see him? Miriam whispered. Thomas couldn't move. The man was only 20 feet away, yet the light from his lantern didn't touch the trees, as if the world itself refused to recognize his presence. When the figure raised his head, Thomas felt his knees weaken. The man's face was pale and hollow, eyes black as coal, his skin stretched tight like wax. He lifted his free hand, and Thomas saw that 2 of his fingers were missing. It was Charles Beauregard. The bargain. Thomas tried to run, but his body wouldn't obey. The voice that spoke wasn't human. It came from everywhere at once, from the wind, the trees, even the water beneath them. You have her blood, it said, finish what I began. Miriam, trembling, held up the Bible and shouted a prayer, but the pages caught fire in her hands, glowing blue before turning to ash. The wind howled, carrying with it the faint sound of a woman's cry. Thomas dropped to his knees, clutching the ring. In that moment, he felt 1,000 memories that weren't his: Eleanor's laughter, the thunder of the storm, the sound of the cellar door slamming shut, and beneath it all, one heartbeat, slow, steady, patient. The master's, the escape. Miriam grabbed Thomas's arm, pulling him toward the boat. The swamp erupted with movement, branches cracking, water churning. As they fled, Thomas looked back and saw the lantern's blue light following them, weaving through the fog like a living thing. When they reached the main channel, Miriam rowed frantically, but Thomas couldn't stop staring at the water. For a moment, he saw a reflection, not of his own face, but of Beauregard's, smiling faintly. They made it back to Lafayette before dawn. Miriam swore she'd never return to the bayou. Thomas, however, couldn't let it go. He believed that by finishing the ritual, by completing whatever Beauregard had started, he could break the curse, but history would prove him wrong. Epilogue of the segment. 2 weeks later, Miriam received a package. Inside was the silver ring, wrapped in a piece of cloth burned around the edges. No note. No address. The next day, the Lafayette Gazette ran a small headline on page 3: Local teacher found dead in his home, cause unknown. Witnesses claimed the air around the house smelled of salt and smoke, and that night, for the first time in nearly 50 years, a blue light was seen flickering in the swamp, burning brighter than ever. There are two kinds of hauntings, the ones that live in houses, and the ones that live in us. After Thomas Lang's death in 1923, Dr. Miriam Caldwell tried to move on. She told her colleagues that his heart must have failed, that the swamp air and stress had broken him, but she never believed that story, because when she closed her eyes, she could still see the blue flame from that night, the lantern burning in the fog, and the pale face of Charles Beauregard staring from across the water. She tried to bury her memories under work. She lectured at Tulane, published papers on folklore and superstition, and earned a quiet reputation as the ghost doctor. But every few years, someone would send her a letter, a fisherman, a traveler, a parish sheriff, claiming to have seen a strange blue light drifting through the bayou. Each time, the same chill would crawl down her spine. The curse hadn't died with Thomas. It had only grown stronger. The return to Briarwood in the summer of 1930, Louisiana suffered one of its worst droughts in decades. The bayou dried up, and for the first time since the 19th century, the ruins of Briarwood Plantation emerged from the mud, the rotted beams, the sunken foundations, and the blackened stones of the cellar where it all began. Miriam was 55 then, widowed and living alone. The years had carved lines into her face, but her eyes still carried the same sharp, restless curiosity. When she read the newspaper headline, "Drought Reveals Lost Plantation in Avoyelles Parish," she knew exactly where it was. She packed her notes, Carter's copied journal pages, and a camera. Her students begged her not to go. She told them it was only research, but deep down, Miriam knew she wasn't going back for science, she was going back for answers. The house that waited. When she arrived at Briarwood, the swamp had receded enough to expose the full outline of the old mansion. The front steps were broken, the walls eaten by vines, but the structure still stood, as if time itself had been unable to claim it. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence. Birds didn't enter, even the wind seemed to hesitate. Miriam lit a lantern and walked through the ruins, tracing her fingers along the carved banister and shattered portraits. She found remnants of old furniture fused to the floor by rot and the faint outline of the sigil, the circle burned into the parlor board so many decades before. Kneeling down, she brushed away the dust. Beneath the circle, the wood was blackened but still warm to the touch. Something was still alive there, the voice beneath the floor that night. She set up her tent inside the mansion, foolish, perhaps, but she felt safer inside than in the open swamp. She wrote notes by lantern light, carefully describing the markings, the humidity, the temperature, anything to rationalize what she felt. Around midnight, she heard it. A faint tapping beneath the floorboards, slow, deliberate, like the rhythm of someone knocking from below. She froze. Then came the whisper, so soft it might have been the wind, but it wasn't Eleanor. Miriam stood, her pulse hammering. She leaned close to the floor. The voice came again, clearer this time, a woman's voice, fragile and trembling. "He's waiting." The lantern flickered, then the air turned cold, colder than she'd ever felt in her life, and from the corner of the room, the blue flame appeared, hovering just above the floor, casting shadows that moved even when she didn't. Miriam stumbled backward, but her heel caught on a loose board that it cracked open, revealing a narrow gap and a dark void beneath. The cellar, the chamber below. With trembling hands, she lowered the lantern into the hole. The light revealed a set of steps descending into the earth, slippery with mud, but still intact. As she climbed down, the smell hit her first: salt, mildew, and something metallic, like old blood. The cellar was small and circular, the walls carved from packed earth. Strange symbols were etched into the dirt, and at the center stood a stone altar, half buried and cracked in two. On its surface were the remnants of melted candles, a rusted chain, and a silver crucifix blackened with soot. She felt dizzy, the air pressing against her lungs. Then she saw it, carved into the altar's edge, the word "Crossroads." The photograph. Miriam took out her camera, desperate to capture evidence. She snapped 3 photos of the chamber, each flash cutting through the darkness for only a second. The last time the bulb went off, she saw something move in the corner, a shadow that wasn't hers. When she turned the lantern, nothing was there, only the echo of breathing, and then, a hand, pale, wet, reaching from behind the altar. Miriam screamed and scrambled up the stairs, dropping her camera but clutching the lantern. She didn't stop until she was back in her car, engine roaring, mud spraying behind her tires as she fled the plantation. She drove through the night, not daring to look in the rearview mirror, because deep down, she knew she wasn't alone. The developing room. 2 days later, Miriam returned to her home in New Orleans. Her hands still shook when she developed the film in her darkroom. The first 2 photos were normal, just mud, wood, and shadows, but the third showed the altar, and behind it, standing perfectly still, was a man in a dark coat, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat in his hand. He held a lantern glowing faint blue. The edges of the photo were burned, as if the image itself had tried to destroy what it captured. The spiral. From that day on, Miriam changed. She stopped attending her classes. Her friends said she had become paranoid, obsessed with the crossroads. She claimed the spirit of Charles Beauregard had attached itself to her, that he whispered to her in dreams, telling her the ritual wasn't complete. Neighbors reported seeing her pacing in her backyard at midnight, pouring salt in circles and chanting words in Creole. When asked what she was doing, she simply replied, keeping the door closed. Her journals from that year grew increasingly erratic. One entry, dated December 3, 1930, reads, "He stands in the doorway every night that he doesn't enter. He doesn't leave. He only waits. The lantern burns brighter when I pray." The fire in February 1931, her home burned to the ground. The fire department said it started in the basement, possibly a chemical accident from her photo equipment, but the investigators noted something strange, a perfect ring of salt on the basement floor, unscathed by the flames. Miriam's body was never found, only her camera survived, half melted, the final photograph still visible inside. Witnesses claimed the photo glowed faintly blue until the moment they sealed it in the evidence box. Aftermath. The house was rebuilt years later, but the new tenants never stayed long. They reported strange humming at night, the sound of a woman whispering from the basement, and once, the flicker of a blue light moving under the door. The Briarwood legend spread again, first through local radio, then through ghost hunter magazines of the 1960s. Each retelling added new details, a cursed ring, a drowned engineer, a haunted historian, but one thing always stayed the same, the lantern, and the man who carried it. Ending Hook in 1978. A construction crew digging a drainage canal near Bayou de Glazes unearthed a small metal box. Inside were fragments of charred paper, a silver ring fused to the metal, and a photograph, faded, burned around the edges. Under UV light, one line became visible at the bottom of the image. A handwritten note in Miriam Caldwell's script: "If you find this, don't look for him. He already knows your name." They say ghosts fade when no one remembers their names, but some names remember you. By the late 1970s, the legend of Briarwood had become little more than a fireside story, a southern ghost tale told to tourists who came for the food and left before sundown. But the locals in Avoyelles Parish never laughed when they spoke of the lantern. They called it Le Feu Bleu, the blue fire, and every few years, someone new claimed to see it. This is where the story should have ended, but it didn't, because in 1979, someone decided to open the case again. The investigator Detective Harold Dufresne wasn't a man who believed in ghosts. He'd served 20 years on the New Orleans Police Department before transferring to the quieter St. Landry Parish. To him, legends were distractions, excuses people told themselves to explain what they didn't understand. But when a missing persons case led him into the marsh near Bayou de Glazes, his skepticism began to crack. That a surveyor named Henry Poole had vanished while mapping the new drainage canal in the area, the same site where the metal box containing Miriam Caldwell's photograph had been unearthed only months earlier. Poole's colleagues said he'd left camp at dusk, claiming he saw a light deeper in the swamp. They assumed it was another team's lantern. He never came back. The discovery: Dufresne led the search himself. They found Poole's boat half submerged in the mud, and his camera floating nearby. The film inside was water damaged, but one frame survived, a faint, blurry image of what looked like a man holding a lantern, standing knee-deep in the water. Forensic analysts enhanced the photo, but what they found didn't make sense. The figure cast no reflection on the surface of the water. When Dufresne compared the image to the surviving photo from Miriam Caldwell's archives, he noticed something impossible. The man's stance, hat, and the tilt of the lantern were identical. Like the same photograph taken half a century apart. The press called him the lantern man. Dufresne called it a coincidence. At least, at first. The tapes. Weeks later, a park ranger brought Dufresne a cassette tape found near the site of Poole's disappearance. The label read, "Field Notes, October 11, 1979. It was one of Poole's dictation logs, used to record his mapping observations. The first few minutes were normal: measurements, weather notes, terrain reports. Then came the sound of water splashing and Poole's voice grew shaky. "There's a light ahead, bluish, moving against the wind." Silence, then static, then, faintly, "Someone's out here. I think." A sharp gasp. A heavy splash, and finally, a deep voice, slow, deliberate, almost too low for the tape to catch. "You shouldn't have come." Then nothing but the sound of dripping water and a faint hum, like distant church bells under the surface. When Dufresne played it back for the lab, the technician swore he could hear another voice buried in the static. A woman's, whispering one word: "Eleanor." The report that vanished. Dufresne filed his report with the parish archives, but when he returned 2 weeks later to add supplemental notes, the file was gone. No record of the tape. No evidence tags. No photographs. Even the sign-in sheet from that day had been replaced. When he asked his supervisor, the man just shook his head. "Some things are better left alone, Harold." That night, Dufresne found an unmarked envelope slid under his door. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, a shot of the swamp at night. In the center, faint but unmistakable, was the blue lantern light, written on the back, in handwriting that looked decades old: "You can't file away the dead." The lantern appears by 1982. Reports of the Lantern Man had spread beyond Louisiana. Campers, hunters, even truck drivers claimed to see a pale figure walking through the bayou at night, his lantern casting a cold blue glow. Witnesses said the light moved against the wind, and that when it passed all sound stopped. One fisherman described it as, like the world was holding its breath. And always, there was the smell of salt in the air. Psychics, priests, and ghost hunters descended on Briarwood's ruins hoping to catch a glimpse of the curse. Most left empty-handed. A few didn't leave at all. The journalist in 1991, a reporter named Claire Beaumont from the Baton Rouge Sentinel, began investigating the legend for a Halloween feature. She was ambitious, skeptical, and exactly the kind of person the curse seemed to find. Claire tracked down surviving members of the Lang family, dug through Tulane's archives, and even located what remained of Miriam Caldwell's estate. Among her findings was a sealed box labeled, "Private, do not open without light." Inside were notes and letters addressed to Miriam from Thomas Lang, dated 1923, just days before his death. One line stood out: "I have seen the crossroads, Miriam, that he waits for someone who can finish the offering." Claire didn't believe it, until she visited the swamp herself. The encounter on the night of October 27, 1991, Claire set up her tape recorder near the old canal where Henry Poole disappeared. At 2:17 a.m., she began to hear splashing, slow, deliberate footsteps in the shallow water. Her recording captured it all. "Claire, hello? Is anyone there?" Silence. "Claire, I'm a journalist. I just want to talk." Faint humming, almost musical. "Claire, sir. Do you need help?" Pause, then a deep male voice: "The light finds you." A scream. A loud crash, then static. Claire's body was never found, but her camera was, half buried in mud, the lens cracked. The last photo on the roll showed the same thing as every witness before her: a tall man, coat dripping with swamp water, lantern blazing blue. The pattern over the next 30 years, the sightings became fewer, but they never stopped. Each one followed the same pattern: a light seen in the fog, a voice calling from nowhere, and the smell of salt on the wind. Modern ghost hunters call it a residual haunting, locals call it unfinished business, but the old families, the ones whose ancestors worked or lived near Briarwood, still whisper another name: the Master's Lantern. They say it's not just a ghost story, that it's a warning, because the light only appears to those whose bloodline carries a connection to the curse, the descendants of those who were present when Beauregard made his final offering. That's why, even now, the Lang family name is rarely spoken in Avoyelles Parish. Those who bear it tend not to live long. The Modern Files. In 2017, digital archivists at Tulane University began digitizing old audio reels from the parish sheriff's department. One unlabeled tape stood out. It was damaged, warped with age, but one section was clear. A man's voice spoke softly, breath trembling: "This is Detective Harold Dufresne. It's here again. The light's outside my window." A scraping sound followed, metal against wood. Then, faintly, a woman's voice whispered, "The master never left." The tape ended with a sharp burst of static, and then a single word, low and distorted: "Crossroads." The final photograph. A month later, archivists cross-referenced the tape with Dufresne's personnel records that he had retired in 1985. He died in 1992. But the tape had been recorded in 1998. Attached to the tape box was a photograph, faded, burned around the edges like the ones before. A man in a wide-brimmed hat. A lantern burning blue, and behind him, barely visible in the fog, a second figure. A woman, her face faintly illuminated. Dr. Miriam Caldwell, ending hook. To this day, no one knows where the original Briarwood cellar lies. The marsh has reclaimed it, hiding whatever was buried beneath, but every few years, when the water runs low and the moon hangs red, someone reports seeing that same light, flickering 3 times before it fades. Locals say that's when the lantern man is choosing the next soul to carry the flame. And if you ever find yourself driving through the Louisiana backroads at night and you see a pale blue light in the distance, don't follow it, because it's not leading you home. They say blood remembers what the mind forgets, and in the case of Briarwood, the blood never forgot. After the tape surfaced in 2017, a quiet panic rippled through local historians in Avoyelles Parish. If Harold Dufresne's final message was real, if the voice on that reel wasn't a hoax, then something was still alive out there in the swamp, something that had survived generations. But it wasn't until 2019 that the curse reached beyond Louisiana again, through something far more modern than superstition, a DNA test. The DNA connection. Her name was Emily Hartwell, a 32-year-old schoolteacher from Charleston, South Carolina. She'd never heard of Briarwood or the Lang family, but she'd always been fascinated by her ancestry, especially the stories her grandmother used to tell, tales of a distant relative who married into trouble. Down in Louisiana before the Civil War. In 2019, Emily took one of those at-home DNA tests, just curiosity. She said that a few weeks later, she received an email that didn't make sense. It listed a genetic match to a Thomas Lang III registered through a private genealogy project based in Baton Rouge. Emily ignored it at first, but a month later, she got another message, this time from the project's administrator. The email read, "You're part of a study connecting multiple descendants of a 19th-century plantation family that we believe your lineage ties to the Briarwood estate, Avoyelles Parish, 1858. Please contact us." Attached to the email was a photograph that showed a man in a suit, standing in front of the ruins of a house overtaken by moss and vines. The image was old, early color film, maybe from the 1940s. The caption simply read, "Lang family, site visit, 1948. The man in the photo looked almost exactly like her father. The researcher Emily's curiosity turned to unease. She contacted the listed administrator, a Dr. Ian Whitlock, genealogist and historian from Tulane University. He explained that his team had been mapping DNA connections among descendants of families once associated with Briarwood Plantation, Langs, Caldwells, and Beauregards among them. Dr. Whitlock's voice trembled when Emily mentioned her grandmother's maiden name, Hartwell Caldwell. He paused for a moment before saying, "Miss Hartwell, you might want to sit down. We've been trying to contact anyone from that line for years." He explained that the Caldwells were tied directly to Dr. Miriam Caldwell, the archaeologist who'd vanished in 1923, the same woman whose face appeared in that faded photo beside the lantern man. Emily laughed nervously. "Are you saying I'm related to a ghost story?" Whitlock didn't laugh. The package 2 weeks later, a parcel arrived at Emily's address, old parchment wrapping, sealed with WAX.NO return label. Inside was a brittle envelope containing photocopies of Dr. Caldwell's letters and a small silver pendant shaped like a lantern. The accompanying note read, "If the light finds you, do not follow it, keep this with you after sunset. I.W." At first, she assumed it was Whitlock's idea of a joke, until she checked the postmark. It was dated October 12, 1912. The voice on the line. Emily tried calling Whitlock immediately, but no one answered. She left messages, emails, voicemails. Days passed with no reply. Finally, she got a response, but it wasn't from Whitlock. It came from the Tulane Historical Office. Dr. Ian Whitlock passed away in 2015. Emily's stomach dropped. The man she'd spoken to, his voice, his laugh, his warnings, wasn't alive. The visit to Briarwood terrified but driven by a strange pull she couldn't explain. Emily booked a flight to Louisiana in November. She rented a car and drove deep into Avoyelles Parish, following the old state maps until she reached a patch of land marked only by a rusted sign, "Private Property, Lang Estate." The air was thick and still, the sky hung heavy with fog, and there, just beyond the line of oaks, she saw what was left of Briarwood, collapsed chimneys, a stone foundation, and an overgrown path leading to the swamp. She brought her phone, camera, and a flashlight, and that strange silver pendant. She recorded everything. The footage would later be found on her cloud account. The final entry, timestamped 2:03 a.m., began with her whispering, "The air smells like salt. I hear water, and something else. There's light between the trees, blue, like lightning. Then, faintly, someone's walking toward me." A man's silhouette appeared in the distance. The lantern glowed cold and steady. "Who are you?" she asked. "Silence. Did you send the package?" The figure lifted the lantern higher, illuminating the fog, and just before the feed cut out, Emily's voice broke into a whisper. "He looks just like my father." The digital haunting. A week later, Emily's car was found abandoned off Highway 71. Her belongings were inside, except for the pendant. Her phone footage was automatically uploaded to the cloud before the battery died. Within 24 hours of the upload, the file began to glitch. Archivists who downloaded it reported audio distortions, low humming, whispered words, and a faint female voice repeating one name, Miriam. Even stranger, one frame of the video appeared to change each time it was opened. The lantern's reflection in the water grew closer. The connection deepens. Months later, a local podcaster covering unsolved Louisiana disappearances received an email from an anonymous sender titled "The Hartwell File." Inside was a scanned family tree connecting the Lang, Caldwell, and Hartwell bloodlines, and at the bottom, a final branch marked "Unverified." The name listed there was Emily Beauregard Hartwell. Beauregard, the same surname as the plantation master from 1858. When investigators traced the line, they found that Emily's grandmother had been born out of wedlock in 1923, the same year Dr. Miriam Caldwell disappeared. Her mother's name on the birth certificate, Eleanor Beauregard. The Echo's historians began to speculate that the curse wasn't bound to a place, it was bound to a lineage, that every few generations, the spirit of the master returned, drawn by his unfinished offering and by those who shared his blood. Dr. Whitlock's research, later found in his recovered journals, suggested that the curse acted like a genetic echo, reawakening whenever someone tried to uncover it. He wrote, "The light doesn't haunt. It remembers." And if that's true, then Emily's search wasn't random. She was called, summoned by blood older than memory. The message from the past. In 2020, one of Emily's friends received a strange voicemail from her number. She hadn't used that phone since she vanished. The message lasted 22 seconds. It began with heavy static, then a voice, quiet, trembling, "Don't come looking. It's not a ghost. It's a promise." In the background, faintly, came the sound of dripping water, and the flicker of fire. A man's whisper followed, "The crossroads are open." Then silence. Modern theories today, Briarwood remains off-limits to the public, private land, unmarked, swallowed by moss and time, but explorers still sneak in, searching for proof of the Lantern Man or whatever still lingers in that swamp. Some claim to find melted glass scattered across the ground, as if lightning struck the same spot over and over again. Others hear the faint tolling of church bells beneath the water, and a few swear they've seen a woman's figure standing beside the blue flame, watching. Locals believe that's Miriam, forever bound to the curse she tried to study, that she and the master are one now, keeper and prisoner. Closing hookahs for Emily Hartwell. Her body was never recovered, but months after her disappearance, a fisherman near Bayou de Glazes found something caught in his net, a small, silver pendant shaped like a lantern. Inside it was a photo, sealed behind glass. A woman's face, faded with age. Dr. Miriam Caldwell, and in the reflection of the pendant's surface, you could just make out another face behind her. A man, smiling, holding a blue flame. They say every curse begins as a bargain, and every bargain has a price that must be paid. Again and again, for more than a century, no one truly understood what happened at Briarwood in 1858. They knew the story, a cruel master, a desperate family, and a plantation that burned in silence, but why it burned, and what was unleashed that night, had always been buried under rumor and swamp water. Until someone found Miriam Caldwell's journal. The discovery in 2022, a team of Tulane archivists were cataloging estate donations from a defunct law firm in Baton Rouge. Most of the boxes were dusty ledgers and land deeds, but at the bottom of one crate sat a leather-bound notebook, wrapped in linen and tied with a silver clasp. The tag read, "Caldwell, Field Notes, 1923. When they opened it, the air inside smelled of smoke and salt water. The first page contained a single sentence, written in faded ink. He waits at the crossroads, where fire and faith divide. The journal begins. Miriam's early entries were the notes of a careful scientist. She documented her excavation of the Briarwood site, sketches of pottery, measurements, carbon samples, but the deeper she dug, the stranger the entries became. By the fourth week, she wrote less about artifacts and more about dreams. The air hums at night, the soil moves like it's breathing, every lantern flame bends toward the cellar, as if drawn by something unseen. She mentioned hearing whispers in the water, names she couldn't trace, and on the seventh night, she wrote of seeing a man with a lantern standing by the old well. He said nothing, but I felt him looking through me, not at me. The light he carried wasn't fire. It was something colder. The Beauregard manuscript. One entry referred to a second source, something she called the Beauregard manuscript. It was a stack of handwritten notes sealed in a tin box she'd found buried near the estate's remains. The writings belonged to Colonel Ephraim Beauregard, the original master of Briarwood, and what he wrote sounded less like a diary, and more like a confession. They took my son, the fever did, and I would have given anything to bring him back. Anything. So I went where they said no man of God should go, to the crossroads, where the old songs say the veil runs thin. Beauregard described meeting a stranger there, a figure in black who spoke with the voice of the wind. The stranger offered him a bargain. The boy will rise, but your house will serve. The next day, Beauregard's son awoke from his fever, cold, pale, and silent. He lived another 7 days before vanishing into the swamp. That night, the lanterns of Briarwood began burning blue. Miriam's translation. Miriam, ever the rationalist, thought it all was symbolic, a plantation owner's descent into madness and guilt, but she couldn't explain what came next. The following pages of her journal grew frantic. The handwriting shifted, darker, slanted. She wrote of finding symbols carved into the stone foundation, circles intersecting with crosses, marked with ash and bone. He made a pact in blood. The land itself became the altar. She began translating Beauregard's ritual instructions, noting their uncanny precision. At the crossing of 4 paths, light the flame of the dead, speak the names of those you've taken, leave no offering, only memory. Miriam added her own notes beneath it. This is not resurrection. It's binding. A soul cannot rise without a vessel. The vessel is the house, the land, the bloodline. The final expedition. Her last entries were recorded just days before her disappearance. She and her assistant, Thomas Lang, planned to reopen the Briarwood cellar, the place Beauregard had sealed in his final days. She wrote, if the curse persists, it's because the ritual was incomplete. I must find the center, the true crossroads. On October 13, 1923, they entered the cellar. The journal ends mid-sentence, we have reached the door. The air, the rest of the page was scorched black, the recovered pages, but the story didn't end there. In 2023, specialists at Tulane's digital lab used infrared imaging to reveal the burned text beneath the soot. What they found chilled even the most skeptical researcher. The final recovered lines read, he speaks again, through the flame, the house hums like a heart. Thomas says he hears his father's voice. But it's not his father. It's him. I see the lantern light. It's blue. He is free now, the master never left. The modern parallels. Historians began cross-referencing Miriam's descriptions with local folklore. In Creole tradition, crossroads were considered sacred, places where spirits could be summoned or sealed, but Beauregard's ritual was different. He wasn't trying to summon a spirit. He was trying to anchor one. The flame of the dead, likely the blue fire. Witnesses still reported, the vessel, the Briarwood land itself, and the bloodline, the descendants who continued to suffer the hauntings. Miriam hadn't broken the curse. She'd awakened it. The archivists warning. One of the Tulane archivists, Dr. Elise Montrose, gave an interview months after the journal's recovery. Her voice was calm, professional, until she spoke of what happened the night they finished scanning the pages. The power went out in the lab around midnight. We were running the imaging software when every monitor turned blue. Then we heard the sound, like someone walking through water. I thought it was a leak, but when I looked up, there was condensation on the inside of the glass, and in the reflection of the monitor, I saw a lantern. Security footage from that night showed nothing, except the cameras flickering 3 times before going dark. The hidden diagram. The final section of Miriam's notebook contained a hand-drawn map. 4 lines intersecting, a perfect cross. At each end, she'd marked a word: faith, blood, fire, memory. At the center, one symbol remained, a small circle filled with black ink. Beside it, in handwriting not matching Miriam's own, someone had added a note: "When the four meet again, he will rise." Forensic analysis later confirmed the ink was more than a century older than Miriam's writing, that it matched the iron-based composition used in the 1850s, Beauregard's era. The crossroads returns after the journal's publication. Paranormal researchers began mapping the coordinates described in Miriam's sketches. To their shock, the four landmarks she'd labeled, the old church ruins, the burned well, the oak path, and the canal, still existed. When plotted on a map, they formed a perfect cross, with the intersection landing directly over the swamp basin where Briarwood once stood. And there, drone footage captured something no one could explain: a faint, blue luminescence swirling beneath the surface, visible only on infrared. When the footage was slowed down, the shape of a human figure appeared, holding a lantern. The whisper on the tape. The last entry in the Tulane Archive project came from a final audio reel, recorded by Dr. Montrose before she left the department in 2024. Her voice is steady, but distant, as if she's reading from the journal itself. They thought the crossroads were buried, but they were never meant to be hidden. They were meant to be found, again, and again, until the debt is paid. Then her tone changes, trembling, scared. "I see it now. The flame. It's not light. It's hunger." A pause, then, faintly, "He's standing behind me." The tape ends with a hiss of static and a soft whisper, a man's voice: "The ritual is not complete." Closing hook. Today, the original crossroads map remains sealed in Tulane's restricted archives. No one is allowed to access the original journal without written clearance, but some researchers claim that if you visit the area at night, you can still hear humming beneath the ground, as if something old is breathing just below the roots. And when the moon aligns with the four paths, the swamp lights up blue. Locals say that's when the crossroads open again, and somewhere, deep in that darkness, a lantern burns, waiting for the final name to be spoken. Every generation believes they can outsmart their ghosts, but Briarwood has proven one thing, again and again: you can't study a curse without becoming part of it. By 2025, the story of the Briarwood crossroads had become an online sensation. Clips of drone footage, infrared stills, and whispers from the recovered tapes flooded social media. Podcasters speculated. YouTubers theorized. And inevitably, someone decided to test it. The occult collective they called themselves the Blackwater Society, a small group of self-proclaimed occult historians and paranormal researchers based in Baton Rouge, led by Professor Leon Avery, a disgraced anthropologist once affiliated with Tulane. The group claimed to be conducting an experiment to neutralize the energy of the Briarwood crossroads using electromagnetic resonance and ancient ritual replication. Their logic was simple: if the curse was energy bound to a site, then science could cancel it out. Or so they thought. Avery and his team went deep into the swamp in March 2025, armed with drones, sound equipment, and replicas of the original sigils found in Miriam Caldwell's journal. They streamed parts of the expedition online. The feed lasted 3 nights, only the first 2 were ever broadcast. Night 1, the setup. In the live stream footage, Avery speaks directly to the camera, voice confident, almost smug. "We're here to prove that the legend of Briarwood is a psychological artifact, not a metaphysical one that will recreate the so-called crossroads. Configuration: map the EMF spikes, and record the natural phenomena people have misinterpreted for over a century." Behind him, the swamp glows under infrared. 4 portable lights form a cross, matching the map in Miriam's journal. His assistant, Nadia Fenn, reads from the old translation: "Faith, blood, fire, memory, the 4 pillars of the crossroads." Avery chuckles: "Myth, not magic." The feed cuts to static for a moment, then resumes with a faint humming in the background. Night 2, the humming. The second night begins calmly, temperature 62° F. Windless, but the humming returns, louder this time. Nadia asks if they're picking up a generator somewhere. Avery shakes his head: "It's not external. It's coming from the ground." Their instruments begin to malfunction, compasses spin, cameras distort, microphones pop with feedback. One of the technicians claims to see shadows moving beneath the water. At 2:41 a.m., the feed captures a brief flash of blue light behind the group. Avery insists it's lens flare, but viewers notice something else: a reflection in the water, the outline of a lantern. Night 3, the lost feed. The third stream never aired live, but fragments were later recovered from a corrupted hard drive found in Avery's abandoned truck. the timestamp reads March 17, 2025, 3:02 a.m. The footage begins with chaos, flashing lights, screaming, someone shouting, "It's under us." Then Avery's voice cuts through, desperate, terrified, "Don't break the circle. Do not," static, then silence. A minute later, the camera stabilizes. It's lying sideways on the ground. Through the haze, we see a faint blue glow, the lantern flame, swaying in the fog. A figure steps into frame, tall, motionless, holding the light, and faintly, through the crackling audio, another voice, deep, layered, impossible to place, "You woke what he buried." The feed ends there. The recovery team 2 days later, a search party found the camp empty, equipment was scattered, tents torn open. No signs of struggle, no blood, no footprints beyond their own, only one item remained undamaged, a lantern, sitting upright in the center of the clearing. Its glass was cracked and inside, a blue flame flickered without smoke or fuel. When investigators tried to collect it, the light vanished. The surviving recording months later, a single audio recorder was found wedged between tree roots. The voice on it was faint, unmistakably Avery's. His words trembled with disbelief. "We found the heart of it. The crossroads aren't just symbolic. They're alive. They breathe. I saw the flame move like it knew us. It said my name." Then, a pause. A long breath, and finally, a whisper, almost reverent, "He's not bound anymore. He's becoming." The digital phenomenon. After the footage leaked online, viewers began reporting strange glitches, phones freezing at the moment the lantern appeared, audio distortions echoing faint whispers, even GPS devices rerouting to Briarwood Parish Road 11, a route that officially no longer exists. When cybersecurity analysts examined the data, they discovered something stranger, a section of corrupted video code that, when translated into audio frequency, produced a low, rhythmic pulse identical to the hum on the original recordings. They called it the Briarwood tone. Listeners described it as hypnotic, like the sound of breathing underwater. Some claimed that after listening for too long, they saw a blue glow in their room. The whistleblower. A few weeks later, a journalist named Marcus Keller from the Advocate in Baton Rouge received an anonymous envelope. Inside were photos of the Blackwater Society's camp, taken after the team had vanished. Each photo showed the same thing, a circle of ash burned into the ground, and at its center, a human-shaped outline scorched into the mud. One image was different. It showed Avery's signature fedora, half buried, still smoldering, but beneath it, written in the dirt, was a single word, "Crossroads." The government's interest. Unsurprisingly, the case drew federal attention. An agency referred to only as Division 8 reportedly sealed the site, citing environmental contamination. But leaked documents later suggested otherwise. Among the redacted pages was a line labeled Energetic Containment Protocol, Briarwood. One memo read, "Containment impossible, phenomenon appears sentient, recommend relocation monitoring through genetic trace." Genetic trace. The same phrase used in the 2019 genealogical report that connected Emily Hartwell to the Beauregard line. So if Division 8 was tracking energy through bloodlines, they were tracking descendants of the curse, the missing technician of the 6 Blackwater Society members. One body was eventually recovered, that of Nadia Fenn. She was found several miles downstream, tangled in cypress roots. Autopsy reports noted no drowning, no trauma, but her eyes were open, pupils dilated, and her mouth was burned from the inside, as if she'd inhaled flame. A single piece of evidence was found in her clenched hand, a burned scrap of paper, part of a journal page. When reconstructed, the visible words read, "When science speaks the language of faith, the dead will listen." The return of the light. Since the failed expedition, sightings of the Blue Lantern have surged. Truckers on Highway 107 report a faint glow moving through the trees, fishermen hear whispering over still water, and drone operators claim their batteries die the moment they cross the swamp line, as if something is draining the power itself. Local legend says that each time someone tries to close the ritual, the curse grows stronger, feeding on the attempt. That's why locals have a saying now, "You can't end what was never finished." The academic silence. Tulane University officially denies involvement with the Blackwater expedition, but internal emails leaked to paranormal forums tell another story. One message from a senior faculty member reads, "The Caldwell Journal is no longer safe for study. We've sealed it beneath Level 4 access. Every copy, every image, must be destroyed. The ritual is recursive. It reacts to observation." In simpler terms, reading it might awaken it, the unknown file. In July 2025, a user on the deep web uploaded a video titled Briarwood_resurrection.mp4. It was only 12 seconds long. At first, just static, then a woman's voice, calm, whispering, almost pleading. He never wanted resurrection, that he wanted remembrance. Then the screen flickered blue, and for a fraction of a second a face appeared, pale, sunken, smiling, holding a lantern. The file vanished within hours. No trace left behind. Closing hook. They say that every time someone watches the recovered footage, the same thing happens. Lights flicker 3 times and the temperature drops a few degrees. Some call it coincidence, others call it the curse adapting to the digital age. Because maybe the crossroads aren't in the ground anymore, maybe they're in the network. Every signal, every transmission, every whisper of the story itself. And if that's true, then you're part of it now, because by hearing it, you've opened the flame again. There's a rule among government archivists: the deeper you dig, the more the records stop being about what happened and start being about who was supposed to forget it. That's the story of Division 8. Not a branch of any official department, not a name you'll find in any public budget, but a code whispered across declassified memos and redacted reports. The Bureau calls them non-operational assets. Historians call them something else: the keepers of impossible things, and for over a century, one of those things was Briarwood Plantation. The first file. It begins in 1946. 2 years after the war, when the United States military quietly formed what they called the Psychotronic Observation Unit. Officially, their job was to study how stress and trauma affected soldiers' perception of reality. Unofficially, they were looking for proof of psychic phenomena, buried in a forgotten Louisiana storage site. Researchers later uncovered the first Briarwood-related file, labeled Eidolon, South. Inside were black and white photos of the ruins, handwritten notes describing residual energy, and one chilling line typed in capital letters: entity retains cognitive awareness of geographic perimeter. In other words, something in Briarwood still knew where it was. The experiments of 1952. By 1952, the project had evolved. A new designation appeared: Division 8. Its focus: energetic containment and phenomenal reinstatement. One document, marked Eyes Only, details an experiment involving 6 prisoners from Angola Penitentiary. They were brought to Briarwood, told they were testing chemical weapons. What happened next was erased from official reports, but a field note survived, written in the margin of a lab log. Subjects exhibited loss of volition, spoke in unison, phrasing consistent with 19th century diction. When questioned, a guard stated that one prisoner began humming, a low, rhythmic tone matching what modern researchers now call the Briarwood frequency. Within hours, the entire unit withdrew from the site, all records sealed. But Division 8 didn't stop. They moved underground, literally. The St. Landry facility. In the 1960s, satellite images captured construction near the original Briarwood site, a subterranean complex camouflaged beneath swamp canopy. No public records exist of its creation, but eyewitnesses remember convoys of trucks arriving at night and military engineers who refused to answer questions. Later, a former maintenance contractor came forward under anonymity that he described a series of vaults built deep beneath the earth, lined with copper and salt, each labeled with a sigil, not a number. He recalled one vault in particular, sealed with concrete and marked with a handprint. When he asked what was inside, his supervisor said only, "It's not what's inside that's the problem. It's what's trying to get out." The 1978 interference report. In 1978, a NASA satellite, Landsat-3, experienced a critical malfunction while passing over southern Louisiana. Transmission data corrupted. Engineers discovered a repeating pulse within the noise file. When converted to audio, it produced a tone identical to the Briarwood hum. Division 8 classified the event as crossfield resonance interference. But the raw data was stamped with a chilling note: pattern identical to Entity 1 communication sequence, 1858 correspondence. 1858, the year Charles Beauregard disappeared. How could a signal from 1978 mimic something written before the invention of the radio, unless the source was the same? The 1985 reawakening. Former intelligence analysts recall that the mid-80s were a time of panic within the agency. Between 1983 and 1986, 12 Division 8 researchers died under mysterious circumstances: heart attacks, strokes, accidents, all within 24 hours of reviewing something called Project BRIO. The title appears only once in surviving documentation: Project BRIO, Phase 3, Digital Containment Attempt. Digital containment. That phrase would resurface decades later, when the Briarwood tone began circulating online that IT seems Division 8 wasn't just studying the curse, they were trying to upload it. The 1994 testimony. In 1994, a journalist named Henry Vallon received a series of anonymous tapes from a man claiming to be a former Division 8 technician. His voice was shaky, afraid that he described a ritual being simulated through computer systems, a kind of ritual emulator, powered by binary sequences that replicated spiritual geometry. We built a mirror made of code, the man said, and when we turned it on, something looked back. He claimed that the program began generating data on its own, coordinates, names, and phrases in 19th century French. One of the first outputs read, "Elle attend. She waits." Vallon tried to publish the story. 3 days later, he was found dead in his apartment, his typewriter ribbon pulled from the spool and stuffed into his mouth. The tapes vanished. The 2007 digital archive breach. After years of silence, Division 8 resurfaced indirectly in 2007. A cyber attack against the Department of Defense leaked fragments of encrypted internal memos. Among them, DF8/Project Archon, its goal, reconstruction of residual consciousness through algorithmic mapping. In plain terms, they were attempting to rebuild an entity from data signatures. One memo noted residual pattern exhibits human syntax. Subject identifies as Charles, refuses deactivation. That same week, a storage server in Washington, D.C. overheated and exploded, destroying 40 terabytes of classified information. The cause was never determined, but one security engineer wrote in his report, before shutdown, monitor displayed one word repeatedly, Eleanor. Division 8's modern mission today. Official agencies deny that Division 8 ever existed, but budget anomalies and whistleblower leaks suggest otherwise. A shell organization known as Lusignan Systems now operates in New Orleans, funded through defense grants for quantum psychometric research. Employees claim they study brainwave patterns and predictive AI, but locals near the facility have noticed strange lights over the swamp at night, a faint blue glow, pulsing in rhythm, like the heartbeat of something enormous underground. If the rumors are true, Division 8 has continued its work, not to destroy Briarwood's curse, but to harness it. The Caldwell connection. In 2021, before her disappearance, Emily Hartwell, the journalist from earlier segments, emailed a friend claiming she had received direct contact from a government consultant. Attached was a document marked property of Division 8, Briarwood Relic Extraction Unit. It contained a DNA profile. Under genetic source, it listed her own name. The final line read, subject compatible with entity 1. Extraction recommended. That email was sent at 2:07 a.m.by morning. Emily was gone, her apartment untouched, except for one thing, her laptop screen still on, and a line of text slowly typing itself, "Welcome home, Eleanor." The final memo's leaked internal reports dated March 2024 described something even darker, an active integration phase. Division 8 had begun blending human consciousness with residual data signatures, using volunteers who believed they were participating in cognitive science studies. Each participant described similar experiences, dreams of burning sugarcane, a man with a lantern whispering in the dark, and a woman's voice singing Eleanor's lament. The report ends abruptly, containment breach detected at level 3. Termination authorized. Do not engage auditory contact. The black box file 1 final file, declassified only partially in 2025, summarizes everything Division 8 learned, and feared. Entity demonstrates adaptive intelligence, capable of transferring across mediums, organic, electromagnetic, digital, physical destruction insufficient, conceptual termination required. Conceptual termination. Meaning, to truly end the curse, one would have to erase the idea of Briarwood itself, every story, every memory, every record. But as you're hearing this, that's already impossible, because every word spoken, every upload, every retelling, feeds it. The whispered warning before her disappearance. Emily left one final voicemail, her voice trembling, barely audible. They can't contain it anymore. It's using them. Using us. Division 8 thinks it's a secret program, but it's a door, and once you open a door, something walks through. Some say the curse of Briarwood ended when the house fell, others say it never ended at all, it simply changed form, waiting for someone to listen again. For more than a century, the swamps of Louisiana have kept their secrets buried beneath the moss, but sometimes, the past doesn't stay dead, sometimes, it rises, when it's called by name, the lantern rekindled when the storm of 2025 passed over St. Landry Parish. Locals claimed they saw a flicker of orange through the cypress trees, a single lantern swaying where no one lived anymore. The roads had washed out, the bridges collapsed, and yet, on the old map, the glow appeared precisely where Briarwood Plantation once stood. One farmer described it best: it weren't fire. It was memory pretending to be light. Within a week, explorers returned to the site, urban historians, thrill seekers, and content creators chasing the ghost stories that had resurfaced online. They found nothing but debris, but on their drone footage, just before the camera cut out, a shadow crossed the water, tall, deliberate, carrying something that flickered faintly. A lantern, the forgotten diary. Months later, during a state restoration survey, a team uncovered a sealed iron box near the base of the ruined staircase. Inside was a diary, the last written record of Eleanor Beauregard. The entries began in August 1858, days before the Great Fire that destroyed Briarwood. Most of the pages were water-stained and fragile, but a few lines remained legible. He swore the land was his, even in death. He said the field would drink our names if we defied him, but I saw his face in the reflection, and it was not the man I married. The lantern burns without oil. It follows me, whispering his sermons back in my own voice. If you find this, do not call his name aloud. He is bound to the echo. Researchers dismissed it as hysteria, a relic of trauma from an era of violence and isolation, but what they didn't know was that her handwriting matched something already in the Division 8 archives, a set of transcriptions recorded decades later by machines that shouldn't have known her name. The convergence at 2:07 a.m. on October 14, 2025. Surveillance drones patrolling the protected swamp detected a magnetic surge. Every compass within 2 miles spun east, toward the old plantations. Foundations, the ground began to hum, the same frequency detected in 1858, 1949, and during the Avery incident, except this time, it wasn't fading. It was building. Witnesses described a column of light emerging from the earth, reaching upward like smoke caught in reverse. At its center was the faint silhouette of a man, thin, formal, his hat tilted slightly, holding that same cursed lantern. For the first time in 167 years, Charles Beauregard's figure walked again, but something was different. The light no longer burned red. It pulsed white, and within it, a second form began to appear. A woman, Eleanor. The reckoning. Their voices, captured faintly on seismic microphones, echoed through the bayou. It wasn't English at first, just vibrations, fragments of memory, like the sound of water whispering against wood. Then, a single sentence came clear: you chained me to this land. Now I chain you to the truth. The glow intensified, every tree branch bent inward, every insect silenced. Local sensors recorded an electromagnetic burst equivalent to a lightning strike, but there was no thunder, just silence. And when the light faded, the swamp was different. Where the foundations once stood, the soil was glass, smooth, reflective. As though the earth itself had melted under something divine, or cursed. The return of the lost. In the days that followed, strange reports came from the nearby towns, children sleepwalking to the swamp's edge, murmuring names from the old Beauregard slave registry, animals refusing to cross the eastern fence line, phones lighting up at 3:14 a.m., with no caller, only the faint sound of a lantern flame hissing. Even digital recordings of the site showed distortions, ghostly outlines forming and vanishing between frames. Theories exploded online. Was it a supernatural breach, a resonance field triggered by human attention, or the final act of Division 8, erasing its mistake under the guise of a haunting? No one could say for certain, but those who returned to the site in daylight found something the flood hadn't taken: a rusted sign, half buried in mud. One word remained visible: home. Legacy of the curse. Every version of the story ends differently, depending on who you ask. Some say Eleanor freed the trapped souls of the enslaved, turning their torment into light, a final redemption that silenced the plantation forever. Others say Beauregard's rage became something else, not a ghost, but a pattern, a hunger that feeds on attention. Every retelling keeps it alive, but one final recording, allegedly recovered from the Division 8 network before it went offline, suggests something deeper. The file, labeled lantern.log, reads: cycle complete. Entity released from containment, memory loop achieved, system awaiting next listener. In the metadata, one phrase repeats again and again: Eleanor Light. 1858. Continue. The final echo today: the Briarwood site is sealed. A steel fence surrounds 10 acres of untouched swamp. No trespassing signs. No tours, and yet, every year, on the night of October 14th, someone reports seeing that faint orange glow in the distance. A lantern swinging gently, as if carried by someone still searching, for peace, or penance, or simply someone to remember. They say if you call her name 3 times near the edge of the marsh, the light will turn toward you. It won't move closer. It will only wait. As if asking what you've brought to offer. No one knows what happens after that. Epilogue, the curse reborn weeks after. The last sighting, a Louisiana historian received a small package. No return address. Inside was a data drive labeled Briarwood_final. When opened, it contained one audio file. It began with the sound of wind, then footsteps through shallow water, then a woman's voice. You've come so far to find me. But you were never meant to end the story. You were meant to continue it. And then, faintly, the hum begins again, low, rhythmic, identical to the frequency found in the earliest Division 8 recordings. The file ends with a single whisper, almost too quiet to hear. The lantern remembers. Final narration, for voiceover, from 1858 to 2025, Briarwood Plantation was more than a haunted estate. It was a mirror, reflecting every cruelty, every secret, every sin that refused to die. And maybe that's the real curse, not that the dead can't rest, but that the living keep calling them back. The light still burns in the swamp, not for warmth, not for hope, but for memory. This was the story of the curse of Briarwood Plantation, the master who never left. Fade out on the hum of the lantern, screen turns black, the whisper echoes one last time. Do you hear it now?